Welcome to Your American Dream. I'm Anisha Jennings, and today we're exploring the living between cultures with Diana Sanchez-Vega, whose journey from Argentina to Nashville proves that sometimes our greatest strengths lie in the spaces between languages and cultures. Welcome, Diana. Thank you for being on my show.
Thank you, Anisha. Thank you so much for having me. And hey, props to you for an amazing project that you're doing here to elevate and to bring awareness to immigrant business entrepreneur, women entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your kind words. So tell us all about your journey from Argentina to now Nashville. I know you've had a long journey. Tell our listeners all about it.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, the length is also because of the years. I'm a wise lady. I'm up there in my age, but the older I get, the more fun I have. I have to say that,
Yeah,
full disclosure.
awesome.
I was born and raised bilingual and bicultural in Argentina, and my mom married my stepdad, who's American, when I was 5 years old, and so I was always in between two cultures, in between, I learned to speak, English when I learned to speak Spanish at the same time. Very similar to what we see happening also here in the US with dual language programs in schools that have exploded, which I think is fantastic. So I attended English speaking schools. And then I graduated. I really wanted to do acting. I wanted to be an actress, but I was dating my then first now ex-husband. That's a long story anyway. And so he kind of discouraged me, and I listened to one of the things that, as in hindsight, we always say, oh, I should have done what I really wanted to do. But anyway, so I went on to study international business. Always, I would work full time and go to school at night and on Saturdays. And then I got divorced and I continued working. I worked for a couple of American companies. I used to do work with the embassy, the American embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina, my hometown. And then eventually I met my now second ex-husband, who's American, but both of my ex-husbands we have very friendly relationships with, and I really, really take them in my heart. I have a very good place in my heart for them because they are very amazing men. And so he's American. And so we dated long distance. And then I decided to move to the United States. And everybody told me this was back in 1999. Everybody told me that it would be so easy because I spoke English, because, I was raised bicultural, bilingual, and it was like, oh my gosh, I have everything to go. And so I moved here in December of 1999. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, because Chris, my second husband, he was living there. And it wasn't easy. It was tough. It was hard. I didn't know how to find work because coming from Argentina, your resume is 5 pages long. You have a picture on the front page of your resume. You say your age, like everything was different. And so I kept sending these resumes. And the truth is, I came here on a tourist visa. So I had 6 months also because, I wanted to make sure that this guy that I had been dating for a year and a half wasn't a serial killer or something, right? So I wanted to make sure I didn't overstay half a second. And so it gave me 6 months to figure out. So the only way really to find work was to try and find an employer who would sponsor my work. And so in my last trip to the US, before we decided that I would move to the US, on my way back from Atlanta to Buenos Aires, I met this really nice, kind lady, and we just, hit it off. She sat next to me on the plane, and, we were just having a glass of wine and talking about our lives and stuff. And she said, my daughter lives in Atlanta. So I was telling her all about, I'm moving in December. And, she's like, okay, when you move, I'll give you her information so that, you can have someone to touch base with. Her daughter, of course, also being Argentinian. And so when I moved, I called her and I introduced myself. I says, oh, yeah, my mom told me all about you, yada, yada. And so, we just became friends. And about 3 months of me having moved, she calls me and she says, hey, the consulate of Argentina in Atlanta is looking for an admin, a part-time admin person. And I said, okay. I said, I can do the work, but I I don't have a visa. I don't have it. She's like, just go. If nothing else, you can always offer to intern, and then it would look great on your resume if you don't stay, working for a foreign government office. And so I did, and I must have impressed the consul very well because they hired me. He said, well, in 10 years, we've only given like one administrative visa. And so I was the second one in 10 years. And sorry, when I got there, they said it was actually a full-time job. And so that gave me, for those that know about visas, an A1, A2 visa, actually. A1 is a diplomatic visa, but an A2 visa, which is just administrative visa. And so it gave me the papers to stay without, I wasn't going to get married. I could tell Chris, I'm like, I'm not going to get married. I've already been married. I'm not going to do that. It's just not in who I am. And so I worked there for a year and a half. And then we decided to get married. And so that I had to, file for my papers and stuff to get my green card. And so, there's that period when you stop working because you're an alien in adjustment of status. So we were living in Atlanta. And through that time that I was off for it was close to 2 months, right? That I was waiting for papers to come through. Some girlfriends of mine and I went to Nashville, Tennessee, because we had like this group of about 4 or 5 girlfriends. She had just moved to Nashville and she had gotten a great job promotion and she was pregnant and her husband was traveling and she hadn't unpacked boxes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so we organized, we went there for about 3 or 4 days. And I fell in love with the city. I'm like, I could move here. And so I went back to Chris and I said, hey, Nashville is great. Chris is in the music industry. He's like, it's a no-brainer for me. Like, let's move. And we sold the house in 3 days. And so we went to Nashville. And it was hard in Nashville too. It was harder than in Atlanta. And so that's how I ended up in Nashville.
I know you summarized your story quite a bit compared to when I heard your story. So tell us, what does living in the hyphen mean to you?
So for me, life in the hyphen is really being between two cultures, two languages, two spaces that you either have one of them inside of you if you came here and you didn't grow bilingual or bicultural, but somehow if you are an immigrant, you come from another culture here to the United States. So you have it. So it's really what I call mediating internally between these two spaces, these two sides, I also do, Anisha, some acting work and I'm getting back to doing some acting because I'm a speaker, but I have a knack I really enjoy the space. And I remember when I had moved to Nashville, I wanted to do some acting. And everybody would ask me if I could do a Mexican accent in Spanish. And I kept saying, no, I can't. And I tried. I cannot do accents. It's just something, especially in Spanish. It might be a little different in English, but in Spanish, I can't do accents. And so I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like I should, and, they would have like decent roles and no, no, no. And so they're like, you fit everything. We just need someone with the Mexican accent. And so I hired a dialect coach and I said, okay, can you help me? And she was very honest with me. We talked for about an hour and she said, accent is very tied with your identity. There's like in Spanish, we don't have like in English that you have American Standard English, ASC, which is a specific accent that you train for. We don't have that in Spanish. And so I realized that was my part of the two spaces that I want to hold on to. And she says, there are people that can't let go of their accent because they feel like, like the thinker Lao Tzu says, if I let go of who I am, I may become who I might be. Right. So it's being between navigating life in the hyphen is being between these two spaces daily, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep and in your dreams too. So it's actually 24/7.
Yes, lovely. I like how you said in your dreams too.
Oh yeah. I'm sure you also dream in other languages besides English. I dream in
Yes.
other languages.
Yes, like when you're stressed or when you're excited, you always talk in your native language. It just comes out. So, how has your multicultural background influenced your business approach?
So I mentioned it was hard, right? And I think it was harder because everybody told me, and I thought it wouldn't be hard. And so it was double. It was really the process of acculturation, of really getting into, and you've possibly heard, and maybe the people listening or watching have also heard that, there's different stages when you move into a new country and your community, something that is very different than where you come from, right? And one of them is integration, and then it's like four stages. The third one is integration, and the fourth one is acculturation, is really being immersed where you can function mostly 100%, close to 100%, but 98% or 95% of the time, you can function in that culture as if you had been born and raised in that culture. And so when I meet people that have moved to the US, right, whether refugees or immigrants or expats that have moved here from other countries, what I find usually is this sense of feeling that you are, what's the word? You're not being faithful to your homeland if you adjust too much. And so you in your mind, it's almost like, oh, if I do this, if it goes well here, I have a couple of people that have gone through my interpreter trainings that have called me and asked me, they've gone back to visit and they get this kind of guilt trip back home. Oh, you should help us more because you're doing well. And
Yes.
so that acculturation and multiculturalism is what I bring when I do training for people that have to be interpreters, and they're interpreting for two different cultures, right? Because they're usually interpreting for someone who's an English speaker. Not necessarily, I could know if I'm interpreting for a doctor that, who's Indian, right? A native of India. And then and they're speaking in English, but they're talking to someone who speaks Spanish, who is from Guatemala, right? So here we have all these cultures coming in. And so it's not really about bringing what it is going on in yourself, but as someone who can understand that process, it's really being culturally humble.
Yes.
I do presentations on cultural humility, and I continue to learn about cultural humility. It's not, I might have moments when I'm not that humble, you know?
Yes. That's great. I didn't think of it like that, but that's true. The guilt trip is real. Like when you go back, people either, they talk to you about why you should be supporting them or why you've all of a sudden now you're American, even though you're not. Like I was born in India, I was raised there, I lived my life there, and now just because I'm living for a few years in the US, now all of a sudden I'm American, or your accent has changed, or this and that.
Oh my gosh, the accent thing. Absolutely. It says, why you speak Spanish strange now? They look at me like, like stop speaking like that. And I'm like, no, it hasn't. It's like you are hearing it differently. But I know that if I'm around Argentinians here, let's say there's a celebration or whatever, go Messi, World Cup coming up. I don't think he's going to be in the World Cup, but still, doesn't matter, right? So I know that it might be different that if I'm interpreting for someone and that accent is not around, but the passive aggressive is like, why are you speaking like that? Like you're not like, are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, bam.
So true, so true. I can so much relate to that. So tell us about what inspired you to start your Sanchez-Vega communication back in 2003.
Yeah. So I started, so when I moved to Nashville, I did odd jobs. I did a lot of things. I worked for the newspaper as like a tour guide when, schools would come and see how a paper is done, which is amazing. A daily newspaper is printed. I then went to work for the advertising department, and I was still feeling, I don't want to say homesick, but I was not feeling grounded in Nashville. Right. And so I actually started Sanchez-Vega Communications and then a nonprofit at the same time because it actually happened at the same time. So I was getting requests, oh, you speak Spanish. Can you translate this? Can you interpret that? And of course, I had done that work, the other way around, let's say from English into Spanish in Argentina for different organizations. And so I realized that there was an opportunity, and also the foreign-born population in Nashville was growing, especially Spanish speakers. It was growing because Nashville is a United Nations gateway city where that resettles refugees,
Mhm.
right? With, as part of the whole system of resettlement. And so Nashville was also developing a lot, so a lot of construction, and so a lot of Spanish speakers were there. And so I was getting asked to do these things, and I'm like, it started to become pretty often. And I believed that I could contribute with me having recently got through the process, or I was actually going through the process of acculturation. And I really, really, Anisha, besides all that, kind of, I'm kind of a bossy pants. So, so I have a hard time working for other people, right? Because usually what happens is that I like to work. I like to work, and I know a lot of people do, right? I'm sure you do too. We were talking before we started about like all the work that you have going on.
Yes.
But when you work for someone and you are giving 100% and they're giving 50, but still telling you that you're not doing enough, it's
Yeah.
really tough for me. And so I had a couple of those experiences in these odd jobs, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And so I started that, but then I met this lady who had been wanting to bring Argentine tango to Nashville. And so I started the nonprofit Argentine Tango, and I mean at Tango Nashville. And that grounded me from like a social component because, we had classes and events and it was very social activity.
Tell us more about the tango.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's been a long time, but it ran from 2003 through 2010. I started as a volunteer and I finished as a volunteer. I hired a lot of people and paid them a lot. I invested money in it and got kind of half back, but I knew it was more like a passion project. And so at first we started just with one class, right? And I have an knack for PR. And so I started sending, we got, because tango is intriguing and exotic and sexy and stuff, and so people started asking about it, and so we had a couple of stories and newspapers and then TV shows, and then we started growing. We added first we had a beginners class, intermediate, advanced. Other More people would move into Nashville from other places where they would dance the Argentine tango, so when they arrived in Nashville they would look for a group that was doing that. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I have to tell you, we got kicked out of a couple of churches because the dance was too sexy. But I'm like, I told the church, I said, they're going to be wearing short dresses. The dance is very into the legs get, and they're like, no, we have a multicultural festival. We want to, and we got kicked out. I said, I told you, but anyway. I like to break barriers,
Yes,
as you can
clearly.
see.
You have quite the story.
Yeah. I like to, yeah, I go in, I'm bold.
Yes, amazing. So, how has your bilingualism changed over, like, how has the value of it changed through your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is my passion. That is my core. So because when I learned to speak the two languages. And in other countries, when you speak English, it's actually a ticket out of there, right? If you live in a developing country, English is a way to
Yeah.
work with English speakers, Americans mostly, or other from industrialized countries, I'd say.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was a tool. It was mostly a tool that I would use, and I would always, put that on top of my resume, and that usually worked well for me. But one of the things that happened, I would take it for granted. It's like, okay, it was part of applying for a job for me, right? And so where I come from, and I know that other developing countries too, usually, when you speak English, you are like higher in the list, for people applying for a job, right? And usually a job requires and says, we're gonna looking for a bilingual secretary, a bilingual administrative assistant, right? And it is assumed in a way, and generally it is, at least my experience, that you get paid more than the people who are not bilingual, right? But what I was finding here in the US is that the language was like a cute, cool thing to have. I usually say it was like having a mohawk. Oh, that's so cool. Come and let's hire you, and then you'll take pictures with us in the office and we'll have stories to talk about. Oh, that's cool that you speak Spanish. How cool. This is preferred. You can really help us. And I'm like, how much more are you going to pay me if I'm bilingual? So I started to see that there was not, and there still isn't, an understanding that bilingualism is a highly developed skill. It's not just a cool thing, very tied to culture. I get that. But it is a highly developed skill. Whether you went to school, you don't have to be foreign born, right? It doesn't matter if you were born here in the US and you attended, in college or school or growing up, you went to a dual language school, it doesn't matter. It's not something that is learned over 6, 7, 10 months. You don't get a certificate in Punjabi in 8 months to be fully fluent, right? And so I compare it to when we see the amazing gymnasts, Simone Biles and all her team doing a forward flip and a back flip, right? With like in a split second, they go this and they go this. We do the same thing, but in our brain, we go back, we go forward, we go back, we go forward. And people tell me like, "Wow, that's amazing." I'm like, "Isn't it? Now pay me more for it." And so I am on a mission, Anisha. I am on a mission to help and to kind of, because you can see I'm like a tough love kind of person, to tell bilinguals and multilinguals, stand up for yourself because I had to do it. When I started to realize I was being taken advantage of, it wasn't, I don't think it was taken advantage of initially. Nowadays, it would be if there's no differential paid. But I think back then, it was like a curiosity thing. It was like, oh, this might be good. If you look at research, the research in the early 2000s, late 1990s and early 2000s, there's lots of research that says that language skills don't increase business, like they don't help with business development. Yeah, and there's from very high, very reputable, not high, very reputable sources. My question is, if it really didn't help business that much, why do we have so many AI engines trying to do that?
Right. Valid question. Yep.
Right?
That's amazing. So before I met you, I didn't even think about this aspect of it because it just comes naturally to us either because we have grown up speaking multiple languages or we went to school for it or we had parents speaking different languages. So I never really thought about the angle of monetizing it. So how do you approach monetizing bilingual skills?
Yeah, so I have my program called Monetize Bilingualism. There's I have two or three different things. One is training bilinguals and multilinguals to be interpreters, where their job is actually like what I've done for decades. So your job is actually to use those language skills, like that you're hired because of your language skills and only because of your language skills. Maybe because they like you or anything, but the number one requirement is that you have to be fully bilingual and you also have to be trained to be an interpreter because being bilingual is like having a class C driver's license, having a class D driver's license, a regular driver's license, but being an interpreter, being trained interpreter is knowing how to drive a tractor trailer. It's kind of like having a commercial driver's license. You need the additional training. It's not the same thing. And so the first step to monetizing is understanding is really going in like everything else in business with a strategy. And so in order to go into a strategy, you first have to understand what it is that what components or elements that strategy has, right? So you have a number of credentials. One of, where you went to college or you have a certificate or an associate's degree or it depends, different talents with some kind of training, and the language should be added to that as a credential, but it has to be documented. So we have language proficiency assessments where we assess people, and it's not just me saying, oh, I speak Mandarin. I was attending a webinar not long ago, and this was in the healthcare space. And one of a lady that's in a like a was in charge of interpreters at a hospital that did things right because it's also compliant with federal law, like you have to comply with federal law. And so they were assessing everybody that had self-identified that they were bilingual or multilingual. because the law says that if you're not able to communicate with a patient and or their family in a way where they're understanding you in that language, and it's not so much, a lot of people say, oh, you have to know medical terms. It's not just about the medical term. It's really conveying the message of what you're saying in a way that it lands on the other end. Yes, you have to know the medical terminology, but it's the way of trying to explain a complex concept. Like if it's a diagnosis, for example, it's not the same as if you travel somewhere and you go to a restaurant and ordering food off of a menu. It's not the same thing, right? You can point at the menu, you can say, you can do different things or say, I want to have what they're having. You know what I mean? It's different.
Yes.
So this Mandarin speaking doctor didn't pass the proficiency assessment. And he was livid. He's like, he got mad, with a man. He went all the way up to the CEO of the hospital. He's like, what? Like I says, I go to my church, and in my church, I don't have any problem. I speak to people in Mandarin. Not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And so it took him 9 months until he passed the proficiency assessment. But what that tells you is that until then, he had been speaking with patients in his Mandarin, and patients go to a doctor because they're unwell. Something is happening, or even if it's a regular checkup, right? They want to, they're being cautious, preventative. And so that's not what you do every day. You're going to trust what the doctor is telling you. Was it? It's like when I go to the airport. I have something with people checking you in at the airport. Nowadays that we do everything on the kiosk and stuff.
Yes.
So then I'm not sure that you're going to travel. I'm not sure how late, but they have those darn luggage stickers, those long things that you have to stick. And I know they have the instructions, and I know I get it. And I read the instructions, but when you're arriving at the airport, and if you don't travel every single day, all day long, right? You're like reading at it. And so I go, and many times I don't stick them right because I'm thinking about my trip. I'm not thinking about the sticker having to match. And so I go to drop off my thing. I says, you didn't stick it well. And I'm like, I said, I don't have training in the sticker luggage thing, right? So this is the same thing. And every time they get mad at all the airlines. I'm not calling it every time. And so I stay there and I have a conversation until they do it themselves because they need to get to the other traveler. And I'm like, okay, well, sure. Well, and so this is the same thing. If you are not, so one is the person that is bilingual or multilingual, and the other one is those doing the hiring, the organizations. The organizations, no one can tell me now that no, we didn't know we had to pay a differential. They know it's everywhere, it's out there, right? And again, if not, we wouldn't have billions and billions of dollars being invested in AI to do stuff in multiple languages.
Yes.
And the other part is the individual saying, you need to get your house in order, get your credentials, get documentation, know this. And when you go and either apply for a job or apply for a promotion, leverage your language skills and say, how much more are you going to pay me for this? And if not, go on to the next one. You will start to see differentials are now starting to be paid because people are refusing to do extra work that monolinguals don't have to do in the same position. That's unfair.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. So, I mean, your analogy was perfect, on point. I laugh so much.
We need to come up with a different thing because that's not working.
Yeah, that is a hard one. There's something that we don't do right with it. I hear you. So, how do you train others to bridge cultural gaps?
Get them to think about their story. I get them to think about to journal just a little bit, not like do journal, just a little bit, write down a little bit how it was when everything was foreign and different for them, and try to understand, this is the cultural humility component also, how now they're in a different place because they had to process a lot of things. I worked for Children's Hospital Los Angeles for 1 year. I have to tell you honestly, it was not a good experience. I learned a lot, but the environment was very, very horrible and political. And I had peers that were interpreters that were also foreign born that would look down at people when they interpret. I would say, oh, look how they do this, or, patients and families and stuff. It was very disheartening to see that. So I make sure that in my, and after that, I launched my official trainings, because before that I was doing it through a couple of other organizations, but then I launched through my business, the trainings that was back when I came back in 2019. In 2015, I moved to California.
Yeah.
I got divorced and moved to California, was there for 2.5 years. Amongst other things, I worked for Children's Hospital, didn't like living in LA, went back to Nashville. So when I went back to Nashville, a lot of what I learned working in California helped me to launch these trainings. And so to answer your question is two things. I help them to I remind them and get them to do their own personal introspection of how the experience was for them. And then really make them do different exercises to be hyper observant while you're interpreting. You have to be looking at how people's reactions and how people are reacting, because how I train interpreters is not just like what we call conduit, which is what you say in one language then in the other, blah 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 blah, right? That's AI, right? But how I train interpreters is to lean in and then lean back out. A lot of interpreters have been trained by people that come from the court system where like you have to be just this. But in community settings like healthcare, education, social services, even in businesses, business meetings or like HR meetings, that kind of meetings,
Yeah.
you need to be able to stay hyper observant. If someone seems to not be understanding, and lean in and check in with being transparent with the other party, that's what you're doing, and then coming back. And so that part of the observation, that part of the training is critical to be able to bridge that cultural divide. And most of the time, Anisha, is so funny. It's not race and ethnic cultural problems. It's not necessarily that. Most of the time is system related culture, understanding American systems and how they work. And so English speakers many times, not always, but many times really not stopping to think that maybe this person doesn't know how systems work in the school system, in in a business, in whatever. I was interpreting, I have many cases, but one that was not long ago for this young man, and this was over the phone. He was a farm worker, right? And he was in California, was a farm worker, and especially men, they never go to the doctor, right? But and he had to go. He had a minor accident, and so they then checked his blood, and his sugar was a bit high. So anyway, they were giving him medication. He had never taken medication in his life, except for like, herbs or something that was more traditional medicine, right? And so he didn't know that the nurse practitioner says, okay, we're going to send you. So, okay, we'll send you the prescription to the pharmacy. And he's like, what do you mean you'll send it? Like he's thinking in his mind, I imagine, like, are you going to like throw it? Like, okay, here it goes, right? Farm worker is not using computers all the time, right? And feeds his family and stuff. And so the questions being asked, and so I was doing the conduit, right? That what he says, what she's answer with it. And so after a couple of rounds of that, so I intervene and I say we speak of ourselves in the third person. And so the interpreter is going to check with the patient. And so I said, they're going to send it through the computer. And he still didn't understand. And he says, what do you mean? Because in his mind, he's thinking actually, the little medication bottle,
Yeah.
right? Is it going to
Got
go
it.
to, and so it was and the nurse practitioner was like, yeah, just tell him we're sending it. That's what she said. We're sending it over the computer. And so we had to, and it's most of the time it has to do with systems. I can tell you, when someone says that there's not this sense I find in the healthcare world or in the education system that a lot of the times, like there's not this connection that people might have two jobs or even one job. And if you have to go to an appointment, you have to ask for time off at work and stuff. And so the first thing in the mind of someone, they say, okay, they agree to a surgery. The first question out of the patient's mind is which day? Because they're already thinking all the organization they have to do. And the healthcare people in the healthcare team, in their mind, is like, you have to have surgery, figure it out. It doesn't. It's not like that. It has to do with systems most of the time.
That is such a great example because I know I felt the same when the doctor told me we're gonna give you a script and then you can get the blood work done. I didn't understand what that meant. Like, what script? What do you like? I know the word script. I know enough English to know what a script is. What do you mean you're gonna give me a script and then I go get the blood work? Like, it was interesting. So I can only imagine how he must have felt. But that's true though. That's like it
I
is.
cannot, and I cannot tell you, like when I came here, like in Argentina, when you waited, like the person that, like you go to the doctor, there's not like a nurse and that, right? You go and the person that sees you is the doctor. A nurse might come in, right?
Yeah.
And so and they don't close the door if you're inside the room. That made me crazy when I would open the door. A nurse go by, would close it. I would open. So when I go in, physically into a place, I always tell them like, because we don't stay in the room, and that's part of the training. If there's no one from the rest of the medical team, we're considered part of the medical team inside, inside an exam room. They say, "Oh, the doctor will be you right away." I tell them that I'll be right outside the door, and we just, we're standing, or if it's long, we ask for a chair. But I say, close the door, but I'm right here, so that, I think now, especially if it's the people that are not used to that, and they kind of look at me like where are you going to be? Like, how far are you going? Right.
Yeah.
And so I point and I say, I'm going to be right here. And I show them, right? Really. And that's like, it's so minor. And it's so minor, you have no clue. And so I'm on a mission to fill all those little gaps, right? And I'm going to get there. I don't care. I don't care if, I have one tooth left while I'm going to do it.
That makes so much sense because sometimes I say things to my husband, right? And he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "How do you not get it?" Which again makes sense because what he's thinking in his brain, according to the systems here, and what I'm thinking in my brain in like three different languages, does make a difference. So this is so insightful to me that, how you're taking bilingualism, multilingualism, and emphasizing the importance that it is a skill. I didn't even think of it as a skill. I mean, not really, but I didn't think of it where it's a skill you can monetize. So you're doing amazing work. Thank you for
Oh,
that.
thank you. Thank you.
So, what role does empathy play in language services?
Oh, Anisha, you hit one of the things that is so close to my heart. So you just mentioned, right? You just said when you talk to your husband and you're thinking of this system like different, but also in three different languages, right? So we know that language and culture are very connected. Even again, if you were born and raised here and you learned, the second or third language here as well, because language is shaped as a result of the culture, and culture shapes language, right? So it's like the chicken or the egg, like what came first, what came first. And most people say culture because people wouldn't speak. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe they didn't speak the language verbally how we do now, but maybe they were uttering noises, and those noises was the language. I mean, when a baby is born, the first thing that a baby does is cry, right? So that's the first expression. That's the first language, right? Expression of what they're feeling. And so empathy comes for me with languages, comes with patience and listening, right? So empathy, when I think about language services, the patience and the listening, many times I find that I'm going to take it even further back. The amount of times, 9 out of 10, when you have a dual language communication, that both speakers, English speakers and non-English speakers, don't have the patience to wait until the other person stops speaking to
Yes.
give an answer to speak. It's like going back to kindergarten, like
Oh,
one person at a time. Right? And even when I'm speaking as an interpreter and I'm interpreting, right, rendering what was just said, they jump in. And so listening and patience, people that do interpreted sessions correctly, not the interpreter specifically, but the two parties or three parties or however many parties there are that understand listening and patience are the most empathetic communicators, right? And I know that's not just for languages, right? That's for anything, right? When talking about airlines, I'm not in Nashville right now. I'm out of state, but when I was traveling in Southwest, you know how they have great air, they have fun air hostesses, right? And so the woman, and this was right after these accidents we just had, the air hostess was, going through the different safety things and stuff. And at the end, she says, look, I've been married 40 years, so, I'm used to people ignoring me. But if you're sitting next to someone who was ignoring me, remind them of the safety measures because it's important that they know them. So that's empathy. Empathy is listening and patience. That's basic.
yes, absolutely. That makes so much sense. And when you said that, we don't wait, especially when you're talking multiple languages, it's because there's so much going on in your brain because you're like trying to talk in a language, think in a language, and feel in a different language. So it's definitely a lot. So that's amazing. So you spoke about interpreters and you coach interpreters and you have a program. So tell us more about what it is that you do in your business and how you train other people.
So I'm an interpreter and a translator by trade, right? I've been doing this my whole life, got specialized in the area of healthcare, like community settings, healthcare, education. I do what I call peripheral legal, which is like mediation and depositions. I don't do court. I don't like the court setting. It's not my area. I really 15 years ago I looked into it, took a workshop, and I'm like, no, that's not mine. And so I have a trainings that I'm actually reframing my trainings to allow for more flexibility, more self-paced. But the first step usually is assess someone. There's a two-step before people register. I assess their language skills. Spanish, I do it, but I have people that speak other languages and are interpreters themselves. I call them language coaches, Arabic, Mandarin, Dari, Swahili, like whatever the language is. I'll find a language coach that can help assess the speaking portion, but we assess speaking, listening comprehension, and reading comprehension. We don't assess writing because I wish I had had a spell check when I was in school, but it's there, so we don't need to assess that. And then those who pass that language proficiency assessment with 80% or higher, then they are quote unquote eligible to register for the training. And so the trainings I have are 70% based on healthcare and 30% based on education and other services. And the reason is because at the moment, and I'm hoping, and we are in February of 2025, but at the moment, there's two national certifications for healthcare interpreting. There's also, of course, national certification. There's certifications for court interpreting, right? And they're working diligently to groups to come with a certification for education interpreting, but it's not there yet. And so we have like different levels. Someone that is, you can be bilingual, then you get trained to be an interpreter. You can't see my hand. Be an interpreter, you are qualified. And then if you want to apply for the higher level, which is certification, you have to at least be trained and then apply. And then if you pass the certification exam, it's an exam, then you are certified. It's first a written exam where concepts, and then oral exam if there's an oral exam in your language. And so I have the foundational training, which is this one here. So I have the language proficiency assessment, then the foundational training that qualifies as an interpreter, and then I have exam prep courses for healthcare interpreting. But then separate from that, I have the program called, not called, but all of this is part of the Monetized Bilingualism program. I have a career coaching boot camp that is an 8-hour boot camp because there are people that say, yeah, I speak one, two, three, four, five languages, but I don't want to be an interpreter. Great. I said, you need to leverage your language skills in the workplace. Doesn't matter if you're an accountant. I don't care.
So if people want to get in touch with you for taking the assessment or just learning more or even learning how to monetize their bilingual skills or multilingual skills, what would be the procedure? How can they reach you and what's the best way?
Yeah, they can go there. Let's see my finger. I was trying to do this earlier. They can go there, Diana at Sanchez-Vega.net. And if they want to check out, www.sanchezvega, Sanchez-Vega.net. The hyphen is important.
Yes.
Hyphen. How many, listen, you're Anisha, I'm giving you homework. Why is it that so many systems don't allow hyphens in the last names or first names? Like computer systems, they won't take it. They don't like the hyphen. I'm like, why not? If they say this document is printer friendly, that has a hyphen, but not in my last name.
I don't have an answer, but I'm thinking because there could be a confusion between the hyphen and the underscore.
Oh, okay.
That's just something that popped to me, but who knows? I don't know the answer to that.
I
But
don't know.
I'll do my homework for you.
Thank you.
What advice would you give to bilingual or multilingual professionals or entrepreneurs or anybody for that matter?
So two things. The first thing is if you don't value your language skills yourself as what they are, as highly developed skills, others are not going to value them. So if you go into a job because you want to get the job and they say that they want you, oh, great that you speak, that you have this other language or languages. And then you end up realizing that you can't blame who hired you. So it's really important to start by recognizing that and by knowing like there's hope. This is my second thing. There's really hope for bilinguals and multilinguals because the US is starting to realize that that's what you have to do also in order to retain quality employees. Not that monolinguals wouldn't be quality employees, but if you want bilingual, multilingual quality employees, you have to have that happen. And the other thing is this is the United States, right? I know different people are worried about different things, like, in many places there are, but this is not to say a cliche, the land of opportunity. So getting out of the imposter syndrome, right, that a lot of us immigrants have, and, for entrepreneurs as well, and especially female entrepreneurs, that you can't find this, that you can't. I'm in the process now of making a bit of a pivot in my business, right? And presenting it in a different way and helping organizations build a multilingual infrastructure in the workplace so that they can save money and capitalize bilingual human capital. So don't say, look, I'm locked into this, because there are many, many, many other options, especially way more than where we come from.
Well, thank you so much for this insightful and entertaining conversation. I had a blast here. Thank you
Likewise.
for, giving us this view, and the work you're doing is amazing. So thank you again for your time. I appreciate you.
And you too, Anisha. Thank you so much and keep at it. And, I'll be sending you people. Thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. As we conclude our conversation with Dinah, remember that being between cultures isn't a limitation, it's a superpower. This is Anisha Jennings reminding you that sometimes the best connections happen in the hyphens of life. Until next time.